Morning, everyone, and welcome to our Industry City program at Mobile World Congress, Las Vegas. And specifically, our first session as part of our FinTech Summit, the focus of this session is on financial crime. My name's Gorman, I'm the FinTech lead at the GSMA. Big thank you for joining us today. I'm not sure the traction on the right-hand side is, but still, delighted to see you all here today, and I hope you enjoy this session. A big thanks also to our sponsors, NTT and WorldPay and Telesign for their support in helping us create the Industry City program. We've got an hour, so we need to kind of move forward briefly. And if I can introduce my colleagues who will be working with us on this session. Hope that didn't click 3 times then. So we've got 2 presentations and then a panel discussion. The presentations will be from Telesign and also from T-Mobile. And then iconectiv and AuthenticID will also be joining us. So delighted that Blake, Blair, George and John can join us today. Industry experts, and our idea today is to discuss both the themes of financial crime, some of the kind of recent trends, but also explore some of the solutions that are really fighting back. So we need to move at a fairly brisk pace. So I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Blake, for his presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Blake Piccolo. I'm a product manager at Telesign, specifically in our verification space, but Telesign also deals within the digital identity space as well. Know your customer, account takeover signals, all of those different tools that you can use to protect your business, to protect your platform. And I'm sure for some of you here, some of the things that are fed in to help some of the customers defend their platform as well. I know we have people here from the consumer side as well as from the telecommunications side. So there's really 2 pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to solve. I know it's something that gets brought up a whole lot, especially at conferences over the last couple of years. But obviously with the changes that came along with COVID-19, that had a huge impact on the telecommunications business especially. You know, people went and worked from home. A lot of traditional brick and mortar businesses started to do online, whether that be telehealth, saw a huge surge. FinTech businesses have seen a huge surge. And of course, along with all of that, there's so many new challenges that we have in order to defend not only the platforms that we have online, but also the customers that are using those platforms every day, ensuring that they're not victims of crimes, as well as our platforms aren't victims of crimes. And so there's a lot of new things to consider and a lot of new challenges that have been brought to the table as a result of COVID-19 over the last couple of years. And so what are the impacts of that? Aside from us working from home, us doing our business online, what has the industry as a whole seen as a result of that? So first off, a 3 to 4 year acceleration of the digital transformation. Where we are today is where analysts expected us to be 3 to 4 years from now as far as our interaction with the digital space, how much of our shopping we do online, how much of our other industry business we do online, whether that's making a doctor's appointment, shopping for insurance, talking to doctors. All of those different activities have been accelerated very quickly, and that's required our customers to make big and fast changes to how they operate their businesses, how they protect their platforms and their customers as well. And so that's really accelerated a lot of the tools that we have to have available to our customers a lot more quickly than we expected. Along with that, of course, there's traditional growth in the traditional online platforms as well, a 20% increase in e-commerce transactions. And so with that level of targeted activity that cyber criminals can attack, there's obviously a lot more opportunity from them. And alongside that, we've seen a 40% increase in cyber crimes over the last 2 years. And so there's just so much more opportunities for these criminals to go to, whether that be your traditional e-commerce platforms, your FinTech platforms. All these new targets for cyber crime have made it so that we have to have a lot more advanced tools and things in place to stop them. And so as they advance, we have to advance on our side as well in order to ensure that we're protecting our customers. So the great transform. We got one more ahead. So So what are the things that have driven this change outside of COVID-19? Of course, COVID-19 is a big part of what's accelerated it over the last 3 to 4 years, but there's other things in place that have accelerated our move to the digital age as well, whether that be device and 5G wearable and 5G technology that has brought the internet closer to us on a day-to-day basis. We each have our phones in our pockets, we have watches, we have other types of wearables that have brought digital technology much closer to our person on a day-to-day basis and in a minute-to-minute basis. The customer experience, we've been able to provide much better customer experience to our users online, whether that be they don't have to walk into a store to deposit a check, they can do it right on their phone. Instead of having to go to a doctor's office to talk to a doctor, you can have a doctor on the phone in 5 minutes that can send your prescription through the internet to a pharmacy, and you can have that drug within an hour, whereas opposed to having to make an appointment, that being a multi-day process. So there's both technology advancement as well as expectation advancement from our customers that have driven this change on top of the real surge that we saw over the last 2 to 3 years. So what does that mean for us as providers, as companies that have customers? So there's 3 big things that we're trying to do with our customers. We're trying to connect to them, we're trying to protect them, and of course we have to defend them, right? So first off, there's 2 kind of places that we have to consider, right? We have to consider protecting our platform, and we have to consider protecting our users as well. Both of those have very valuable assets that we have to ensure aren't being taken advantage of by cybercrime. From our platform's perspective, we have to keep bad users off, right? We don't want users coming on that can abuse our platform, that can take away ROI from our different tools, and that can even create bad experiences for other users. And then on the user side, we want to make sure that not only are they having as little friction as possible when accessing our platform, they're also able to use the tools that they want, and they're not being victims to cyber crimes through synthetic identities from other users, through account takeover attacks, and through everything like that. So there's really so much to consider when you're running an online platform as far as protecting the different touch points across both your users as well as your own interests as well within your platform. And so what Telesign likes to preach is our idea of continuous trust. And what that is it's the trust that's across the entire life cycle that a user has with your platform. I think some of you may have heard of the zero trust concept within enterprise platforms, where at every different step of the process, you're ensuring that you're authenticating your user repeatedly as they go through their journey on your platform, to ensure that at each stage that user is who we thought they were at the beginning, and they continue to be that user, and they're not victims to synthetic fraud attacks or anything like that. So at the onboarding process, you have your set of verification and authentication that you do with that user, that KYC. Every time they access your platform, there may be other checks that you do to ensure that, hey, we saw this user a year ago and they were good. Are they still a good user? Has that account been taken over, or is it still that same person that we verified out of the gate? And then, of course, anytime they do a transaction or anytime they're interacting with another user, there may be other steps that we take to ensure that that user is still a secure and valid user within our platform. And so that's really where we're creating this kind of continuous trust profile with that user. We're seeing their activities at the beginning, in the middle of their life cycle, and at the end, tracking those and ensuring that there's no activity that's outside of the norm of what we would expect. So what challenges are ahead? What do we see as the big overhead view of cybercrime over the next 3 to 4 years? And so, one of the biggest issues that we've had, it's always a big news story. I think every week you see one of these, is these data records that are ending up online. About 14 billion records have been leaked online over the last however so many years, and only about 4 of those were actually secure, so encrypted leaks. So there's plenty of valid data on there. If you go to many of the dark web platforms out there, you can get names, you can get social security numbers, you can get phone numbers, and you can create a whole profile of this person, right? I have a story that I like to tell. My wife woke up a couple months ago, and she had an email from Chime. And it said, hey, thanks for opening your account. And so hadn't been on the platform, hadn't accessed the platform, had to call them and be like, hey, we didn't create an account, what happened? And so what we found is that someone went onto the website and had all of her information, her social, her address, her phone number, her name, all of the correct and valid information to open up an account. And so this information is out there, and users can go on and create these profiles using information that's available within the World Wide Web. And so there's so many different things that we have to do to ensure that our users are protected, right? You have to look at different types of information. You have to use different sources of data to ensure that you're checking holistically the entire user. You can't count on 1 or 2 different data sources as you could in the past. There's really so many things that you have to consider when authenticating and verifying users. And so what is at stake, right? What are these cyber criminals after? What's driving them to commit this crime? And so on this slide, you can see a couple different big numbers that have been pulled as far as what are the consequences of cybercrime. And so cybercrime as a whole was a $3 trillion industry in 2020, which was the 7th largest country by GDP. And so $3 trillion is a big pool of money for a cyber criminal to get a little piece of, right? You get 0.0001% of that pie, and you're making a pretty good payday for yourself. And so there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of incentive for these users to come on and try to commit these crimes and try to take advantage of the different platforms that are out there. And then just on identity fraud alone, one of the focuses of Telesign, there was $56 billion in 2020, which is still, the 86th largest country by GDP. And so even if you're in a more specialized part of the cyber criminal community, there's still a lot at stake and still a lot of profit to be had from platforms that aren't necessarily protecting themselves as well as others. So fraud is endemic, right? There's 5 billion mobile internet users. There's 40% of usage in mobile app growth. There's 22% year-over-year growth in services like PayPal. And so this target that we saw on the last slide is only getting bigger, right? That 3 trillion could potentially be 4 or 5 trillion over the next few years as digital transformation continues to happen, as people continue to bring their business online and expose themselves to the opportunity to be taken advantage of by some of these cyber criminals. And so this is a problem that's not shrinking, it's one that's only increasing. And so we have to continue to create more and more advanced tools in order to help protect our customers. And one of the concerns that's always brought up when we're talking about protecting these customers is the user experience versus the security. I think, when you're talking to customers, that's always the biggest concern. How do I make my platform as secure as possible with adding the least amount of friction to my users as possible? And there's obviously a few different ways to address this problem, whether it be through checks that you can do in the background, especially around phone number, to ensure that your user's giving you your phone number. You might do an SMS OTP check, MFA check, something really low friction that user's expected to do. But you're also doing other checks with that information in the background that user doesn't have to interact with. They don't have to take a picture of their driver's license, for instance, which would be a higher friction piece. But you can still check that their first and last name matches what they have across other accounts, such as their cellular provider. You can check to see that they don't have ATO signals on their account. These are the things that you can do without adding any friction to the user journey. And second, there's also ways to spread out that friction across multiple steps. When that user first accesses your platform, they create an account. You may do a verification email or something like that. Something really quick and easy that allows that user onto your platform, allows them to see the potential of what they can do there. And then as they go through, they may, hey, I want to make a deposit or I want to make a purchase. Here's where you do an SMS OTP passcode or you do some other type of check that allows them to then conduct that business. So you draw them in before you put too much friction in their user journey, in their user experience, but you're ensuring that you have verification before those cyber criminal targeting events happen. And so what does that process look like? What are the different tools that are in place to protect our users? And so, there's two different things you can look at. You can look at both the base ad hoc data attributes as well as behavioral things that can be driven by machine learning, AI, those new technologies that we can take advantage of when we're checking against a customer's behavior. So of course you want to check their name. You may want to check their birthday depending on if you have maybe some type of business that's regulated by an age, such as online gambling, which is increasing a lot right now, or buying age-limited goods and things like that through e-commerce. So you may want to check those ad hoc data points, but also you may want to look at the behavior of that user as well. And there's a lot of different tools that companies are using to do that, right? Of course, you can look at their cellular behavior. You can look at their click behavior with those biometric modalities that you see across how the mouse moves. You may want to do a Face ID check from their phone. So you have these different behavioral and these different ad hoc data attributes that you combine to create that full profile of that user. And I think that's really what you have to consider when you're creating the security profile of your platform, is the different tools available. You want to do a mix of those ad hoc and those machine learning driven tools to ensure that you're creating a really robust solution for your customers that strikes the right balance between friction and security for the type of platform that you have. And so what you're looking to create is this actionable intelligence. How do I create a decision or create a group of information that I can then do something with and make a decision for that user? So I bring up their data from their IP, I bring up their behavioral data, their name and address, their 2FA. I have to understand how to interpret that data to make a decision about whether I let this user onto my platform. Maybe I let that user onto my platform, but with more limited capabilities than the full access that I may give a user with a better profile, with more authentication that has been provided. And so that's what you're looking at, all these different pieces of information, using a scale and making a decision on what you want to do with that user. And where Telesign really likes to come to play there is with that phone number, which links that user's digital access with their, their offline access as well. Everyone, has their phone. That phone's linked to their address. It's linked to their name. It's linked to their phone number. It's their date of birth. It's linked to these traditionally offline attributes, but then it connects to what their digital profile is as well. What websites they're accessing, how often they're making phone calls. Are they trying to create accounts across multiple profiles hundreds of times in an hour, really trying to fish for access to different types of platforms? And phone number is really where you can help connect those different digital and offline attributes that a person has. But of course, there's all sorts of other data pieces that you can use as well that Telesign covers or can help cover. Telco carrier network, device ID, and as well as PII data checks with the carriers and different things like that. So of course, here's a menu of all the different things that you can take a look at when you're looking at customer authentication and verification, many of which telecommunication technology can help you with, but of course you want to supplement that with other data sources as well to really create that end-to-end user verification and authentication and that continuous trust that you'll have with that user. And of course, all of this is headed towards the passwordless world that we're starting to see a trend to with our users, where you can use these different verification tools, these different authentication tools as a replacement to the traditional passwords that we're seeing users have. With all those different account informations that have been linked online, the password is becoming less valuable as a means of securing an account. And so by having these different authentication and verification tools at play, it really helps to create a more secure user environment for all your users and increase your conversion with lower friction for those users. So that's the presentation I wanted to leave you off with today. I think there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to digital technology, and I hope that this was helpful in getting your brains moving on the different things to consider. Our booth for Telesign is right over there, so if you have any further questions, we'll be there the whole conference to answer them. Thank you.
Super presentation, which really gets framed the size of the problem, but also with the story about how the attack on his wife shows it's a really personal thing as well. Just moving on, I'd like to introduce now, if I may, John Morrow from T-Mobile. Great to get the network perspective also, and so looking forward to hearing John and his thoughts and insights also.
My presentation today will be relatively straightforward and simple. I have one message to drive home today is this idea that SMS OTP is really insufficient as to prove possession with regard to MFA. So today, the world relies upon almost exclusively on username and password and SMS OTP for mobile auth. That's de rigueur today. But we all know these systems are vulnerable to bad actors. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm going to keep on going. While there can be debates about how the future of usernames and passwords or whether the FIDO Alliance will eventually rule the world, I want to focus my talk today on improvements enterprises can make now, today, not a few years from now. And so for the vast majority of mobile login flows in use today, SMS OTP is the current proxy for something element of 2FA. But SMS OTP alone is insufficient to prove account holder possession. And so let's talk about why. If a user initiates a flow with a SMS OTP and an enterprise gets a valid set of 6 digits back from that user, the enterprise now has proof that someone is holding that phone. But what they don't know is they don't have proof that an authorized account holder is the one holding or controlling that device. Again, I may be preaching to the choir here, but sometimes going back to the basics is helpful. And so as we think about this one, the enterprise may have unknowingly passed the house keys to the burglar on a silver platter. Just to be honest about the constraints of our systems today. But have no fear, there is hope, and we have it today. Many of you outside the financial services industry may be surprised to learn that US wireless providers began offering fraud prevention indicators to banking institutions starting in 2016. These indicators give banks additional information about how likely a user is a fraudster, and therefore banks have more information about whether to allow a user access to an account. Again, maybe rudimentary for some, but I'm going to keep on going with the simple campaign here. And because of T-Mobile's position within the mobile ecosystem, we have unique insights into which mobile signals are most predictive of fraud. Continuing on this theme, T-Mobile Fraud Prevent is an API-based solution that we have today that gives enterprises access to unique and differentiated indicators based on raw signals that only wireless providers possess. These signals provide information about the device and the user account with T-Mobile. Both are important, both the device network side as well as account status. The list of signals that we have include SIM swap, both physical and eSIM, port outs, roaming indicators, and then on the account side, first name, last name, change date, email change date, active account status, and more. In total, we today, currently in our hot little hands, have 30 fraud indicators ready for enterprise use today. So we are ready to engage with industry. So today, more than 200 US companies from a range of verticals are using fraud prevent indicators from T-Mobile, and here's why. Number one, there is no added friction in using to the user experience. Fraud indicators can be implemented without any impact to customers. Using a simple API call, companies can request any indicator to help make a decision on access, all without user involvement. Number two, it is a scalable solution. The solution already exists at scale on almost every smartphone in the United States. At T-Mobile, we're focused on protecting users wherever they engage in their mobile journey, and with this API solution, we can help protect enterprises as well. Third, implementation is simple. Just add our API call to your existing user flow and request delivery using phone number as the key. No muss, no fuss. I added that one, I just couldn't help myself. So as a part of this, just to let you know, maybe you are like those from the large enterprise that we've been talking with lately who said, this is amazing, and I had no idea this existed. Maybe you're like them. Well, if you'd like to learn more, please, I know this is 2018 technology, but it's a QR code. If you want to take a picture, you can. If you can learn more from our website about what we have today, we're glad to have that digital conversation or one in person as well. I'd love to talk with anyone after this panel to explain more, and I'm looking forward to the panel conversation as well. Short and sweet, that's the conversation today. Thank you.
So here's our panel. So on stage, in addition to John and Blake, we've got Blair and also George from AuthenticID and iconectiv. So George, perhaps if I could start with yourself and ask you to just do a slight introduction for yourself and the company, please.
Sure. George, am I on here?
No.
All right.
Yeah.
George Cray, Senior Vice President of Product at iconectiv. For those of you who are not familiar with iconectiv, as a authoritative partner to the communications industries, our cloud-based software as a service solutions and trusted communications platforms span operations and network management, numbering, business to consumer communications, and fraud prevention. Basically, iconectiv is responsible for interacting and interconnecting networks, devices, and applications for over 2 billion people every day.
Super, thanks, George. You're most welcome. Blair, for yourself, if you could perhaps introduce yourself and AuthenticID. Yeah.
Blair Cohen here, AuthenticID. I'm the founder, and AuthenticID, for those of you that don't know, is a global identity verification and authentication company. And when I say global, that's kind of unique because most people in the past, we use data to prove identity, but we use attributes that are much more difficult for the fraudsters and bad actors to obtain. And that's something that you have, your government issued identity document that's considered the gold standard for proving identity across the globe. But then again, the other thing that we use is really hard to steal, and that's your biometrics, who you are, so what you have and what you are. Our tagline is identity made simple.
Super, thank you. And you're both most welcome. George, perhaps if I can start with you from your perspective and the work that you do, could you share with us one of the key trends that you see in financial crime?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll stay away from the identity aspect of what's happening here with fraud, but for me, iconectiv is heavily involved in really trying to do call authentication, and so everyone is very familiar with the fact that you get a lot of phone calls that you simply ignore because you have little trust in recognizing who's calling you and whether or not it might be a scam or it might be fraud, and so you let those calls go into voicemail. And so we really need to change the game to where we can get enterprises being able to connect to consumers and have consumers have enough confidence to answer their phone. I think one example, I had read a white paper recently, I think it was UMail with their branded protection services. They had kind of compared the phone to your home, your front door. And today when someone rings your bell or knocks on your door, you don't just run and open the door, you look for some visual cues as to why is there someone at my front step, and should I trust I should open the door for that person? And in many times, you think about, did I order something? Did I order a pizza? Am I expecting a delivery that needs a signature? You then may look at your doorbell cam or security camera or peephole, and is the person out there wearing the uniform you'd expect in order to trust them? And so we don't have any of that with the phone, and that's why when we get these phone calls that we don't recognize, they aren't in our contacts, 80% of those calls just go to voicemail, and that's actually frustrating for business as well because they spend a lot of money trying to connect, and in certain cases, some percentage of those calls, you may not have wanted to answer all of them, but some of them, you probably missed out on some important information, and you're now trying to chase the company to reconnect and get that update. And so at this point, call authentication is kind of our shtick.
Yeah. Super analogy. I've not heard that one before. That's a really interesting, very simple, but really paints the picture. Blair, from your perspective, your business, what's one of the key trends?
From a high profile, from a high interaction standpoint, I think the thing that I'm seeing that Blake alluded to earlier is passwordless is everywhere. I was just at the Gartner IAM conference a few weeks ago, and I swear every booth was proclaiming passwordless, and it makes all the sense in the world. The vast majority of all these breaches, the 14 million breaches that have happened, are due to compromised usernames and passwords. So getting rid of that password and using things that can actually prove who versus just possession, like John alluded to earlier. I'm going to talk about biometrics later, but moving to something like that so we know who's logging in can eliminate fraud, but also accomplish the goal of no user friction or lack of user friction.
Yeah. Blake, if I can come to you, in one of your slides, you teed up one of the major challenges, which is how you protect the organization, but without building too much friction. So in onboarding, how do you actually do that? The slide explains the challenge, but when you rock up at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, how do you actually go about doing that with the customer?
Yeah, so we see onboarding from two sides. We see both our customers onboarding as well as the end user onboarding as well. And a lot of those are in partnership with T-Mobile as one of our providers, where we have to ensure that the customers that we have are using the data for the right reasons, right? And so they have to be onboarded to ensure that they're using the data for an approved use case and that there's no governmental restrictions on the use of that data for that type of use case. And so that's one type of onboarding that we're working to create a streamlined process, a standardized process across the different carriers and providers to ensure that that can be done quickly to get users up and running. And then there's also the friction on the user side as well. And I think a lot of the tools that John alluded to are some of the big hitters as far as creating user security without adding too much friction to your process, right? So we have this IP, we have this phone number, we have an email, what data can we get and can we check against without requiring the user to provide any more input beyond that. And I think, as you get into this journey of passwordless, of verification, of authentication, you'll find that there's a lot of different information available using just these different identifiers as the key to unlocking those different signals. And I think that's really where you should start as far as doing onboarding, doing authentication with the least friction possible for your users.
Right. John, can I ask you to share a little bit more insights on the key use cases that the telco insights are supporting, and why is it those insights are making such a difference?
Sure, but when it comes to use cases, I mean, really, just to be clear, we are a key enabler of this ecosystem. We really are not the tip of the spear. I mean, we're talking about the folks here on the dais who are really engaging with enterprises. But as we understand, we're talking about authentication use cases. We're talking about authorization. We're talking about form fill. We're talking about new account setup verification. So all these use cases exist. Just to mention as well, what I was trying to articulate earlier as well, and I'll say it again, is we're not trying to say that we have the end-all be-all, because that is not the case. The idea is, I think there's all these complementary solutions that hopefully we can ground each individual part as rigorously as possible, and then you can move on to the next piece and make that one as rigorously as possible. So it's going to be a very interesting ride for the next 10 years.
Thanks, John. And George, coming back to your point on call authentication, from a consumer's perspective, what's happening? So what's the customer experience going on, and how is your solution actually helping the customer?
Sure. Well, we've done a couple of things, and I can tell you, starting the US had mandated Stir Shaken, which was a framework that service providers needed to do, which was really built around an anchor of trust or know your customer, where it was really up to the originating service provider to identify that they both knew the enterprise making the phone call or the customer making the phone call, and they had a right to the telephone number. And that would allow them to fully attest and cryptographically sign this phone call, which would allow an end user who's receiving it to trust it. But I think that's, people were hoping that would be the silver bullet to solve all this robocalling. It's clearly not. There's not enough trusted calls going through the network. It kind of proved how much illegal and illicit robocalling is happening, and fraudsters, perpetrating calls, that it's kind of proving out that we do have a big problem, and it takes other signals in order to really defend against it. We've taken another step. We've worked with CTIA on a centralized enterprise registry called Registered Caller. And the goal there was really to get enterprises to identify and get vetted so that we knew we could trust them and understand what telephone numbers they were using to do volumetric calling, and make all that information available downstream to service providers who are in the Stir Shaken ecosystem. And that would allow better attestation of phone calls. And I think kind of the next wave is really adding more details around those phone calls, where you could add rich call data, things like the calling name, a calling logo, and really get an understanding of the calling reason. All those things could be passed along with the phone call, so that when it hits your mobile phone, you have an indication of, why is this enterprise reaching out to me? If it's the fraud department from your credit card company and it says potential fraud alert, that may be one you want to take, and it's a fully attested call. You don't want to let that one go into voicemail. And so I think we're just trying to bring trust back into the phone, where consumers will get back to answering again, at least the calls they want to answer.
Yeah, and where are we now? Just a proof of concept done?
Yeah, there have been various implementations of Stir Shaken. I think we're finding that there's still more to go. There is cross-network delivery of attested phone calls. I think the next wave is really this branded calling. I think that's what you're going to start seeing. More and more people and companies are finding ways to offer that. The technology supports it. So I think we're in that stage. The next stage should be seeing branded calling, but I think we also struggle because there's plenty of calls that happen internationally that really don't get covered by a US mandate for Stir Shaken. And so this is a global problem. It's not something really that can be solved by any one country.
Thank you. Blair, if we can now, I know it's one of your issues. So what types of solutions that
You're going to get me passionate here, Brian. Biometrics I'm pretty fond of. I think a common theme that we've heard up here is that there isn't any one silver bullet here. Not one tool can really solve this problem. But if there was one tool that could solve the problem, it might be biometrics. The other common theme that we've heard here is no friction. We want an easy, super simple UX. And the tools that these guys provide do that, and those work really, really well for the vast majority of use cases. But what if we're doing a SIM swap? What if I'm adding a line? What if I'm adding a new user? What if I'm changing the address on my account? These are all pretty risky transactions, and we want to know the who behind those. We don't want to just do an OTP and make sure the device is still, somebody's able to enter those 6 digits. I want to know who is making those changes. And biometrics have the remarkable ability to do precisely that, which gives you a really beautiful audit trail at the end of the day. In terms of modalities, there are a million different biometric modalities coming out. We talked about some behavioral modalities, so we can see if the person's acting like they normally are interacting with their device. You also have physical biometrics, things like face and voice. So when it comes to the popular modalities and what we see most often, it's face. You know, it's the most robust, it's the most accurate, and honestly, with properly deployed and properly implemented, it can absolutely eliminate the fraud and get rid of all this financial crime while not creating very much friction for the user at all. It's just pretty much as simple as opening up your iPhone is today. You get an SMS, prove your identity, we match it to the original enrolled person, and that high-risk transaction's approved.
What are the main use cases and the main verticals?
Well, onboarding is it's super important. You can't really use biometrics unless you've got super strong, robust onboarding. I need to make darn sure that it's John's voice and John's face that I'm rolling into this process. So super robust identity proofing is imperative. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have that up front, the integrity of biometric authentication's ruined.
What kind of sources did you use to prove that is that person? Is it passport, driving license? What's the main?
Generally, that's considered the gold source for proving identity around the globe. So we run forensic examination on identity documents. We support about 11,000 of those around the world. So virtually every identity document on the globe. We have deep domain expertise in this. We've been doing it for customs and border protection agencies, critical infrastructure facilities for about 20 years. So we know what to look for. In some cases, we're running as many as 2,000 different tests on an identity document. So the bar for a fraudster to be able to create one that we can't detect is super high. So if we can validate that identity document with authority, and in some cases even validate it with the issuer of that document to give us stronger confidence, lift the biometrics from that, and then in real time, the person at the end of the transaction takes a quick selfie with strong liveness detection. We have to make sure it's not being spoofed and it's not another picture of a picture video replay. Match that to the government issued identity document. From there on, it's as simple as just showing your face to authenticate anything high risk or maybe even to facilitate passwordless login.
So are you able to, I'll ask the question and see if you can answer. On a typical day, how many of the identities are you able to actually validate and prove? Our solution is different than most of the people's solution in the industry today in that we're 100% automated, which has some huge advantages. First of all, it's super fast. Yes. We are able to scale the system to process up to 35 million identity documents in a single day, which is probably nothing compared to what Telesign's able to do, but we're talking about a very different type of compute power here. This is computer vision. So 35 million people in a day, up to 1 billion people in a month. But that's for the examination of the document. When it comes to matching and doing authentication using face, I don't really know the number, Brian, but it's infinitely larger than 35 million a day. Thank you. Blake, can I come to you? One of the slides you talk about a proposition called continuous trust. It sounds like that's a world where all transactions are verified. Is that what you mean? How does it actually work in practice?
Yeah, so not only are the transactions verified, but also when a user logs onto the platform and they're looking at their customer data or they're making an account change, as Blair may have alluded to, there's all these different touch points that users have through their life cycle with your platform, and you want to ensure that there's appropriate authentication and verification happening at each of those touch points, right? And now that's not to say we have to do the most expensive type of verification or authentication at each of those touch points, but we do want to do what's appropriate at each of those touch points for the activity that's happening. And so that's where I think the idea of continuous trust, or there's the zero trust principle that's more enterprise that are coming into play, where we're continuously authenticating that user throughout their life cycle, and not just when they onboard, when they log in, and those different big touch points that traditionally have been the locations that those tools are placed. There's so many more touch points where we can run these different types of tests to ensure that cyber criminals aren't able to access user accounts, perform different types of activities on a user's behalf, and all of those different things.
So does that mean in payments, for example, which is trillions of transactions a year or billions of transactions a year, you would use a process to confirm if a transaction needed to even go for further assessment? Is that so?
Correct.
Payments is a really hard area because of the scale.
Yeah, of course you would have some set of rules in place where, hey, maybe for a $10 transaction, there's no or a small level of authentication, but if a user's sending $2,000 or $3,000 across the globe to some country that you haven't seen them do business with before, there's probably an appropriate level of authentication that you want to have on that user before you allow that transaction to go through. And then this is, I think, where we talk about machine learning and looking at the big data that you have within your company on all those transactions can help you start to determine patterns of where that authentication should take place, especially for those larger, more expensive checks.
John, can we just explore the mobile insights again? 'Cause I think credit score is one of your propositions. So how do you go about proving the data points that are most predictive to include in your credit score?
Yeah, it's really difficult unless you have truth sets. So you actually talk to end clients and get truth about actual fraud events that have occurred tied to phone number, and you can interrogate them. Without truth sets, you're dead in the water. So we do that continuously. And what's interesting, recently we did a study with a rather large US bank where they provided some true sets over to us. And what was interesting about it is that there are device and network indicators, as I mentioned before, and there are also account status indicators. Again, device indicators, SIM swap, call forwarding, roaming. On the other side, has an address been changed? Has a PIN been changed? Has a password been changed? Since we're the gateway to the mobile space, if that's been compromised, then the account has been compromised. So what's interesting about that is that there have been plenty of examples where a SIM swap had occurred, but no account status. We found that when there was both a device network change as well as an account status change, those were very powerful indicators of fraud. So it's the combination of both that we found, not one in isolation. And so as a part of this, the use cases that are coming as well, George is alluding to it, branded calling. We're investigating spoofing, spoof-proofing enterprise phone calls, as well as enterprise SMS. There's incremental solutions that we are seeing, and I have to agree that the most rigorous thing is identity verification. It's surprising that T-Mobile will be one of the largest IAL3 verified suppliers of driver's license information going forward. So there's a mix of actual, real, deterministic data. I know you all have been in the space for a long time, and so you've probably run across a data provider that may not have the highest quality of data. I know that might be a shocking thing to say, but the real thing is working, we think in partnership with US carriers, is the fact that we have deterministic data that we can point back to in real life. And so these are the things that we really need to unleash.
Thanks, John. I was just thinking back to Blake's slide before about the size of the problem and comparing it to GDP, which is a great way to kind of frame it, I guess. Fraudsters are very, very clever people, which is why that slide has the numbers that it does. These solutions are all super, but what else do we need to do to make bigger dents into that, reducing the side of fraud? I guess that's the question, really. So perhaps George, to start from your perspective, what else do we need to do to kind of really help move this forward?
Sure. Yeah, I think in the case of putting trust anchors or trying to really do call authentication, the borders are limiting. So the idea that this does happen on a global scale, fraud happens on a global scale, extending that know your customer and anchor of trust beyond borders are going to be required. And it's just one element. So I think we've kind of hit that pretty hard in this discussion, that no one thing is a silver bullet. And the other dimension I think about is the combination of, phone numbers are also used with 10DLC or SMS texting, and so kind of, again, getting to authentication relative to who is sending that text, who's receiving that text. It's kind of a two-way street on can a business trust the consumer that's coming to them with information, whether it's a phone call or a text, and vice versa. Businesses reaching out to you, do I know that it's really that business entity and can be validated? So all of that, we say call authentication. I think, FCC just issued some statements in the US about now trying to limit SMS texting from fraudulent sources and stopping that. So that's going to be another frontier that has to be tackled.
George, and Blair, from your perspective, same kind of question. What do you think we need to do better than we're doing at the moment?
Really having a hard time coming up with one thing for you, Brian. But I'm going to go with kind of repetitive here. So passwordless, A. Really strong identity proofing, B, and then enrollment to biometric modalities, and give the consumer a choice of different biometric modalities for authentication anytime something smells a little bit funny or it's a high-risk transaction. So those are the pieces of advice I'd provide.
So I think what struck me from your contribution today is that I perhaps had a perception that biometrics was still a very, very early stages. It's not, that doesn't sound like that's the case at all. It's kind of now sounds much more of a perhaps mature industry than I thought.
It's super mature. If you see what's happened, so I've been in this business now for about 10 years ago, and 10 years ago there were some facial recognition algorithms that could mistake me for a dog. That doesn't work very well, right? So it's come a long way. So we used to use facial landmarks and heuristic methods to be able to perform facial recognition. Today it's all AI and ML. So when we enroll ourselves in this, it can anticipate all the changes that you're going to make. It makes a convolutional neural network of you. So it anticipates that you're going to gain weight, that you're going to lose weight, that you're going to grow facial hair, that you're going to have glasses on. So in all those different situations, it's remarkably accurate at being able to identify you, regardless of those lifestyle things that happen to people. And it's convenient. I mean, thank God for Apple. They've changed the way that we all look at biometrics today. So face is certainly the more robust. We're bullish and optimistic and excited about voice, but it's not quite there yet. It needs a little more data set and a little more training in order to get over the spoofability. There's still some vulnerabilities there that you can't 100% trust it.
Super, thanks, Blair. And Blake, from your perspective, what else could we be doing better than we're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I think my presentation alludes to this a little bit, but the variety of the tools you're putting in place is really what I see as the key to ensuring that you're protecting yourself from cybercrime. Whether that be IP, phone number, biometrics, there's all these different tools that are in place, and you need to ensure that you're bringing a mix of them to the table to ensure that you're protected, so that there's not one channel that a crime group can get a hold of and repeatedly attack your platform against that same vulnerability. You want to make sure that each different cybercrime is going to have to find a different, unique way to try to conduct itself, to hit a particular user, because of that variety that you're putting in place, where, hey, I have a bunch of IPs, and so I'm going to be able to send those everywhere. It's like, no, I have phone number, I have IP, I have biometric, and so you're going to have to get through a lot of different steps to be able to access what you're trying to access and do the activity you're trying to do.
Super, thank you. John, full set, your perspective on that point?
I agree. There's any one thing is to be difficult, but I will tell you what T-Mobile is doing is we're leaning into this space, unlike we have ever had before. So we're actively engaging into understanding what actual pain points exist with enterprises, so that we can come back and hopefully address them with meaningful enablers for the market. And I think the other part of this one is we could probably do a better job of making this more simple so that our customers can understand it and lock on to it better. Any way we can make things as straightforward as we possibly can, then it's going to be adopted more widely.
Perhaps, John, what's the role of kind of consumer education in helping solve this?
Oh, good. It's difficult. I mean, I think users are primarily going to be faced with a new UI UX the next time they go to a vendor that they engage with, and that's how they're going to see. And it's either going to be friction-filled or frictionless. It's either going to be more secure or less secure. So it's going to be user engagement one by one, I believe. We can do 101, 102, 103 sessions all we want, but it's really about how people are going to engage in the world every day is really what's going to be.
George, the same for you, because your proposition is reliant on giving the customer confidence. It is a valid call. So you've got to educate consumers in your proposition. So how did that go in the proof of concept?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is kind of a learned thing by all consumers, and I think for us, we're trying to make it ubiquitous, so it's not just a single vendor solution or a single service provider solution, but trying to make it ubiquitous across the industry so that consumers can get back to trusting their phone calls and be able to answer and not just let it go into voicemail. So it's a challenge, I have to admit, because there's a lot of players in the ecosystem that adopt the technology and how they use it may be different. And so we're just trying to be an enabler to these businesses and, again, try to deliver it in a ubiquitous fashion.
Thank you. So we positioned today's session as fighting back. So in our last moment, just to kind of close out, do we feel that we are, Blair, from your perspective, do we feel that we're fighting back?
Oh, we've got a long way to go to fighting back for sure. We do see fraud going down pretty dramatically. We do see account takeovers going down pretty dramatically. The bar continues to get raised for the fraudster to perpetrate those type of crimes. So we're moving in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you. And Blake, perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a battle you're always going to be fighting, right? I think with the amount of dollars that is involved, there's a lot of incentive for the fraudsters to continue to attack the different platforms that they're attacking, and that dollar amount's not going to go down. And so these are very resource-backed cyber criminal rings that are performing these activities. And so, as we make adjustments, they're going to make adjustments, and it's just one of those things that you're going to constantly have to be addressing, checking on, watching how the market changes, and it's just one of those things that, it's a core function of your business, right? I've talked to some businesses that we all interact with on a day-to-day basis, and you see them as one thing, but when you talk to some of their teams, it's like, no, we're an identity business. Identity is our business, and then everything we do off that is enabled by our ability to identify our customers. And so you really have to look at your platform as an identity platform at some level, because without ensuring that your users are legitimate, it doesn't enable the other type of business that you're trying to do.
John, just closing thoughts. Do you feel we're fighting back?
Sure. There's a lot more to go.
Yeah, sure. And George, for yourself?
Doubt, though, it's a big challenge, and obviously a global challenge. So even as we sit here, we're thinking about it from a U.S. perspective. It's very global in nature, and you then have to deal with a lot of regulators and a lot of different players in the marketplace in order to really be effective.
Super. Well, so we're out of time. We need to wrap. But on behalf of, I guess, of all our audience, I'd like to thank John, Blake, George, and Blair for both their insights and sharing with us today, but also the work they do to try and kind of fight back. So, gents, thanks very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.